Oh, geez, it's that kind of interview.
Yeah.
One thing that probably not a lot of people know is I've recently gotten into woodworking. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but I recently built a dining table and a bed frame, and that was kind of my COVID hobby that I picked up.
That's so cool. And I know that you're a new dad with a young daughter at home.
Yep.
What lessons has being a new father taught you?
Patience. I was just telling my staff a story earlier that we were reading a book together last night at the dinner table, and she paused, and then all of a sudden my lap got very warm, and I realized that she peed on me, and it's okay, it's fine. Sometimes you got to get peed on and not worry about it. And so I think in some ways maybe there's an analogy there about my work in the Senate. Sometimes you have to get peed on, but I think it's patience and understanding that not everything goes according to plan, and that's okay. What really matters is how you respond to that, rather than how you shouldn't be evaluated on if everything always goes according to plan. You should be evaluated on how you respond when it inevitably doesn't. And I think having a child kind of forces you to learn that lesson.
And how old is she, by the way?
She's 2. She just turned 2.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks.
So, John Elway or Peyton Manning, who do you want to get ownership of Broncos?
Because I think bipartisanship is important, I think they should share ownership.
And would you purchase the Broncos if you were able?
Sure. Yeah.
Do you have any intention to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll hear about it in the news in the days to come.
And what?
It won't be the highest offer, but it'll be a compelling one.
Fair. What is your favorite restaurant in Boulder, and why?
I have a lot of favorite restaurants in Boulder. I think probably my go-to is the Mountain Sun. There's a restaurant that they own here in Denver called Vine Street, and they have a few others, but it's right down the street from my house. It's hamburgers, and it's a brewery, and the beer is some of the best in the state. And it's just a good casual place, and the owner's a good friend.
Good. I went to see Boulder, and I kind of
okay. So you know Mountain Sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the Sink. Okay.
Yeah. So now I'm going to move on to more serious questions.
Okay. Those are kind of serious.
Yeah, they're pretty hard hitting. So, where do you see this legislative session going?
I think it's a good question. I think this legislative session is going in the way of we're going to be focused on a handful of issues that both sides of the aisle have said are very important. I think in many ways we actually have a lot of agreement on how to get there, and then in other areas there is a disagreement, and that's where the debate will be. Is not not whether the goal is valid or a priority, but what is the best way to accomplish that goal. So I think this session is. I wouldn't say it's off to a slow start, but I think it's stable, and it's something that has been relatively focused on the issues ahead of us, whether it's the housing task force, the behavioral health task force, or some of the other important issues that have come up, rather than political drama. And I think that's a good thing for the people of Colorado. There's going to be some drama. There's no question. It wouldn't be a legislative session without it. But I think this session is going to be headed in the direction of having good, robust debate about really important issues to Coloradans.
And you mentioned the housing task force and the behavioral health task force. As you know, they released their recommendations on Monday. Are any of the recommendations, do they stand out to you in particular? Is there anything that you're especially interested in?
I think they're all incredibly important. I think overall we learned that this is an immense amount of money, but the problems that we are faced with are probably much greater than what that money can solve. And I think we knew that going into it, but as we dug into the details, it became more and more clear. I think on the housing side of things, the revolving loan fund is really important because this is one-time money. And so the more we can make sure the money doesn't just get spent and then it's over, but that it can live on past its initial spend is really important. And I think that's what's compelling about that recommendation. I also think there's a lot in the Behavioral Health Task Force recommendations that, again, they're not going to solve a problem overnight. But the reason why I think it's so important is because it is actually the root cause of so many other problems that we discuss down here. whether it's crime and public safety or substance abuse. We really need to tackle root causes more often, and I think that task force is doing that. And a lot of those recommendations get at making sure there are beds for people that are in crisis, making sure that when they're not maybe in that crisis moment, but really still need assistance and help, that there are step-down opportunities for them. So I'm excited about all of it, but I think those are the highlights for me.
And you spoke about the money. The recommendations include spending roughly $1 billion in federal aid. Is there anywhere that you would like to see that money go the most, like any portion of the state or specific population that you would like to target?
Well, I think at the end of the day, this is money to help us get through the COVID time. So we need to make sure that the money is helping those who are most impacted by this crisis. And we know we had behavioral health system issues before the crisis. We had affordable housing issues before this crisis. So these investments do need to go into making structural systemic change that impacts the whole state. But I think we need to also ensure that this money is going towards folks who are not recovering, like the rest of the population, who are disproportionately impacted by this crisis, whether it's economically or health-wise, and really make sure that we're not leaving people behind in the recovery.
Now, taking a step back, I've been looking at a bunch of your bills over the past few years, and you've been extraordinarily successful in getting a lot of your bills enacted. I noticed that one that didn't was the Consumer and Employee Dispute Resolution Fairness Act. I was wondering, why haven't you brought that bill back, and do you have any intention of maybe taking another stab at it?
Maybe. It's a bill that we passed it out of the Senate, and if I'm remembering correctly, the COVID crisis kind of hit, and that's when a lot of bills went away. So it's not to say it was going to be a slam dunk and it was going to pass exactly like it left the Senate. It was definitely a very robust debate around that bill. It may come back in one form or another. I don't have any plans to work on it this session. I think it's an important conversation around consumer safety and making sure folks understand the contracts they're signing, and that those contracts are fair, especially for products and services that they really have no choice but to sign that contract. So it's an important issue. I think it's one that will come up in different ways, but I don't have any immediate plans to introduce a bill right now.
And do you think the Power Act, which came after your bill, has covered some of the concerns that you were worried about?
Maybe, although I think that's a different conversation in some ways. They're related. Because of things like non-disclosure agreements and whatnot, maybe. But I think it's different. My bill was a little more broad in that it impacted consumers as well as employees. But the Power Act is really more geared towards employees and employer relationships. So they're different. There is some overlap. And the Power Act, I think, in one form or another, we will be debating that this session.
Now, looking ahead this year, the election's coming up in November, of course. What do you think the prospects are that the state Senate remains controlled by Democrats?
100%.
You think so?
Yes. No. I think, look, it's going to be a difficult election. The national climate is obviously challenging. The climate in general in this country is challenging because of all the very serious issues that are facing us. I think at the end of the day, it does seem like with the virus surge getting reduced, that there is an opportunity here for us to press reset and make sure we're focused on the issues that are really impacting Coloradans. But there's no question it's going to be a challenging election. I don't think anyone is ignoring that or pretending otherwise. But we need to make the case that we have righted the ship and that we have really helped Colorado get through this period as Democrats. And there's a lot that we've accomplished, a lot of things that we've delivered for Colorado families, whether it's full-day kindergarten or preschool or the things that we've put in place that are starting to bring down healthcare costs, our work on public lands and making sure that we are being responsible as a state as we think about the climate crisis and how it's going to impact the next generation. These are big, meaty issues that we've been tackling over the last few years, not to mention working on the public health response and the fact that we've had a pandemic on our hands. And so I think we need to tell that story better. and talk about still what's to come and what we can still do with Democrats in control of the state Senate. I think we can make that case. We will, I think, partially through the legislation and the work that we're going to do this session. And then we're also going to make that case at the doorsteps and, out there in the campaign forum. So I'm confident that we will keep the majority. I really am, and I think there's going to be a long path between now and that election day. And I think we just need to make the case, and Coloradans at the end of the day, I think generally do support the policies that come from our party and the items that we've accomplished over the last few years.
And speaking of elections, you've got just a few more years left in your term. What's next for you after your time in the state Senate?
I don't know. I'll never say never that I wouldn't run for something again, but I'm not. I don't have a grand plan. I'm not planning on running for something next. I'm not kind of making every decision and taking every step based on whether it's good for my political career. Some people do, and that's fine, but I don't have a master plan because at the end of the day, I never really thought I would be in elected office. I never, had that necessarily in my plans. Here I am, and I have the honor of serving as the majority leader in the state Senate. And at the end of the day, I want to make sure I'm using that power and that authority and responsibility to accomplish what I think is important for the state. And that probably sounds like a BS answer that from a politician, but genuinely, I don't have a plan. I don't know what's next. I know I want to be of service and stay in public service. I also do things on the side that are unrelated to my work here, and that's what keeps me sane. And so maybe I'll, do a little bit more of that side of my life and a little bit less of the political world. But I don't think there's a world where I just kind of leave the political stuff entirely. I don't know if it'll be running for office, but I think I'll still be working in this field. And
have you ever thought about maybe running for Congress?
I've thought about it, yeah. I think the real question is that the life that I want for myself and my family, and how do I feel about being in DC a lot? We get things done and we work together here in Colorado at the legislature. I don't know if I can say the same thing about Washington DC following that method. So we'll see. I wouldn't say never. Politics is all about timing and opportunity and when windows open. But it's definitely not something I am planning for. And we'll see what happens.
Now, narrowing in on Boulder County specifically, it's been over a month since the Marshall Fire.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed any gaps in helping the people of Louisville and Superior to rebuild?
Well, yes, although it's hard to identify gaps because we are still so early. We know there are challenges, whether it's navigating the insurance industry, navigating FEMA, or simply finding a safe place to live because there's already a housing shortage, and now we're 1,000 or so homes less. So, I don't know if gaps is the right way to think about it. It's more that there are immense challenges. There are things we could have done differently to be better prepared. And I'm thinking a lot about that in terms of what can we do to be better prepared for the next disaster. Unfortunately, we know this isn't the last time something like this is going to happen. Natural disasters that are, I would argue, climate-induced are going to continue to be a part of our lives. So what can we do to make communities more prepared so that they can bounce back faster? And so when these disasters happen, they're less destructive. So all kinds of needs and challenges are still out there. I think it's going to be years before real rebuilding occurs. The last few weeks and month or so has been about removing debris. We're still in that stage. There is still burned down wreckage everywhere, and it's going to take time to remove that and then figure out how to remediate the spaces so that they're safe to even think about rebuilding. Right now there's a lot of toxins in the soil and in the materials around there. So there's a long road ahead. We are working sort of behind the scenes and making sure insurance industry is being a good actor in working with these families. But there's no question that we need to be better prepared for these types of disasters in the future.
And what would that preparedness look like for you?
It could be different things. It could be when it comes to emergency response. Our first responders did an amazing job, and they put themselves at harm's way. And I genuinely feel like there's not much we could have done differently that would have stopped this fire from spreading like it did, because it was such a windy day and the fire was so ferocious. But there probably are improvements we can make to the emergency response system when it comes to the reverse 911 calls and things like that. So we're looking into that piece of it, and I know that's gotten some coverage. But then there's also, how can small communities, small cities and towns be better prepared for when this does occur? The community of Superior is not a sophisticated city operation that ever thought it would need to respond to such a disaster like this. How do we provide that technical assistance to these communities to be better prepared for when this happens? How do we ensure that we are thinking more about land use so that brush fires don't turn into mega fires that destroy 1,000 homes? How do we think about resilience when it comes to when we are rebuilding? How do we rebuild in a way that we're not just creating more fuel for the next fire, but rebuilding with fire-resistant materials and thinking about energy codes and building codes so that when this happens, you don't have a fire spread within minutes across entire neighborhoods. I think those are the conversations we need to have. They're difficult. People don't want to be told how to build their home, and I get it, and there's a local control aspect here. But we're clearly dealing with a different animal now, and this isn't your normal, one house catches on fire because of an electrical issue. This is something that impacts all of us. It impacts the entire state when you see 1,000 houses go up in flames. So it's something that I think we need to take a real good look at and talk to the experts that can tell us what we can, as a state, do differently to be better prepared.
And you mentioned earlier housing prices following the fire. One of the big issues that has come up has been price gouging, especially with rental housing. Mm-hmm. I know that price gouging during disasters was outlawed with the House bill in 2020, but it doesn't include rentals. So do you have any intention of maybe addressing that gap and expanding the law?
Folks are looking at that. We are having conversations with the Boulder County delegation, the governor's office, and others, and the local governments, of course, to really get a sense of what is the problem. Is there legislation that could help that problem, either for people now or for the next disaster? And we're still looking into it, but I think it's definitely there are gaps in our policies, and people unfortunately take advantage. But it's still to be determined if there's legislative fix there.
And another tragedy that struck Boulder County this year or last year was, of course, the King Super shooting in March. How has the community recovered since the shooting, and how have you recovered as an individual?
Yeah, it's pretty. It feels like it was just yesterday in a lot of ways. The store is opening next week, reopening. They did a remodel, interior and exterior, and there's going to be some elements, I think, to the reopening in the space around it to honor what happened there. It feels like it was yesterday. It also feels like it was a lifetime ago. It's sad that it happened and it was in the news, and then we all kind of just moved on. But I'm really proud of how the community responded, whether it's donations or being there for the victims and their families. I'm proud about how the store responded and how they took care of their folks. It was an incredibly horrible disaster that impacted everybody in the Boulder community. There's no question. I mean, I shopped at that store. My wife teaches middle school basically right behind it, and that's where they go for lunch breaks. So it's something that touched everybody in the community. There's no question. It's hard to imagine that this store is just now reopening, And at the end of the day, it's going to be something that sticks with the Boulder community forever. I think we have learned from it. We've grown from it. We've gotten closer because of it. But it doesn't take anything away from the horrible tragedy that happened that day.
And as you mentioned, the store is reopening next week. Do you intend to shop there again?
Yeah, of course. Yep. Yeah. I mean, we have to figure out how to bounce back and not live in fear. And at the same time do that while also honoring the victims and the lives that were lost. So yes, of course. I'm excited to go there on Wednesday when it reopens, and we'll continue shopping there.